March 6, 1944. 22,000 feet above the frozen fields of Brandenburg, Oberleutnant Klaus Fischer gripped the control stick of his Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6. The 31-year-old Luftwaffe fighter race had 47 confirmed kills. He'd flown against the British Spitfires, tangled with Soviet Yaks on the Eastern Front, and shot down American P-47 Thunderbolts over France. He considered himself among Germany's finest fighter pilots. In exactly 11 minutes, everything he believed about this war would be shattered. Fischer's radio crackled to life. The voice of his squadron leader, Major Hans Weich, cut through the static. Achtung, amerikanische Bomber, heading for Berlin. Estimated 800 aircraft. Fischer felt his pulse quicken. Berlin, the capital, the heart of the Reich. But something felt wrong. 800 American bombers this deep into Germany? It should be impossible. The Americans didn't have fighters that could escort their flying fortresses all the way to Berlin. The B-17s would be defenseless, easy prey. Fischer had been told this by Luftwaffe intelligence countless times. The Americans' P-47 Thunderbolts could barely make it to the German border before running out of fuel. Their P-38 Lightnings were fast, but they couldn't sustain combat this far from England. Berlin was safe, or so they thought. Fischer pushed his throttle forward. The Daimler-Benz engine roared to life as he climbed toward 25,000 feet, joining his squadron of 12 Bf 109s. Below him, the German countryside stretched endlessly. Forests, rivers, farmlands covered in late winter snow. Somewhere out there, a massive American bomber formation was approaching, and Fischer's job was simple: shoot them down before they reached the capital. He'd done this dozens of times before. He was confident, experienced, ready. But deep in the pit of his stomach, something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. What if intelligence was wrong? At 11:47 a.m., Fischer spotted them. A massive formation of B-17 flying fortresses, stacked in tight combat boxes, their contrails painting white streaks across the cold blue sky. He counted quickly, maybe 60 bombers in this group alone. And according to his radio, there were at least 10 more groups just like this one, all converging on Berlin. Fischer's squadron commander ordered the attack. "Rate attack formation. Hit them from 12 o'clock high. Go, go, go!" Fischer and his wingman, a young pilot named Lieutenant Otto Becker, dove toward the bomber formation at over 400 miles per hour. The wind screamed past Fischer's cockpit. His hands moved automatically, arming his 20mm cannon and twin 13mm machine guns. This was what he'd trained for, what he'd done successfully 47 times before. But then he saw them. At first, Fischer thought his eyes were deceiving him. Silver aircraft, sleek, fast, with distinctive bubble canopies and American star markings clearly visible on their wings. Fighter escorts, single-engine fighters, over Berlin. "Mustangs!" someone shouted over the radio. "American Mustangs! How are they here?" Fischer's blood ran cold. It was impossible. The Americans didn't have long-range fighters. The P-41 Mustang was supposed to be a ground attack aircraft, used only in short-range missions over France. Intelligence had said so. Command had promised them. But here they were, dozens of them, maybe 100, weaving protective patterns above and around the bomber formations, 400 miles deep inside German airspace. And they were diving straight at Fischer's squadron. What happened next would be seared into Klaus Fischer's memory forever. The American Mustangs hit Fischer's squadron like a hammer. One moment, Fischer was diving toward the bombers. The next moment, a P-51 had cut across his path, its 6.50 caliber machine guns erupting in a storm of tracer fire. Fischer pulled hard on his stick, yanking his Bf-109 into a sharp climbing turn, a maneuver that had saved his life a dozen times before. The G-forces crushed him into his seat. His vision started to narrow, but he'd lose the American in the climb. The Bf-109 could outclimb any Allied fighter at this altitude. Or so he thought. The Mustang stayed with him. Fischer looked over his shoulder, stunned. The American fighter had matched his climb degree for degree and was now closing the distance between them. Impossible, Fischer muttered into his oxygen mask. He rolled inverted and dove, pushing his Messerschmitt to its limits. 450 miles per hour, 470, 490. The aircraft shook violently, but the Mustang followed. For the first time in his combat career, Klaus Fischer felt something he'd never experienced before: fear. Fischer tried everything he knew: the split S maneuver, the barrel roll, the defensive scissors, every tactic that had worked against Spitfires, Hurricanes, and P-47s. Nothing worked. The Mustang matched him move for move, and worse, it was faster. Tracers zipped past Fischer's canopy. He heard the sickening thunk, thunk, thunk of bullets striking his aircraft. His left wing shuddered. The engine temperature gauge started climbing. Coolant hit. Then came a voice on the radio that would haunt Fischer forever. "Fischer, brake right! Brake right now!" It was his wingman, Otto Becker. The 22-year-old pilot, with only 9 missions under his belt, was trying to save his squadron commander. Fischer broke hard right, and as he did, he saw it. Another Mustang had latched on to Becker's tail. The young German pilot was trying to shake it, diving low, but the Mustang stayed with him like a shadow. Fischer watched helpless as the Mustang's guns flashed. Becker's Bf-109 erupted in flames. The canopy blew away. Becker, just a kid really, tried to bail out, but he was too low. The Messerschmitt hit the ground outside a small village at over 300 miles per hour. There was no explosion, just a black crater in the frozen earth. And Otto Becker was dead. Fischer's engine was dying. White smoke poured from his cowling, the telltale sign of a destroyed cooling system. Without coolant, his Daimler-Benz engine would seize up in minutes. He had to get down. Now. All around him, the sky was chaos. German fighters falling from the sky, American Mustangs everywhere, on the bombers' tails, protecting the formations, chasing down every Bf-109 and FW-190 that dared to attack. Fischer's squadron had started with 12 aircraft. He could only see 4 now, and those 4 were running for their lives. As Fischer dove toward the ground, his aircraft shaking and sputtering, he had time to think, time to process what he'd just witnessed. The Americans had done it. They'd built a fighter that could fly from England to Berlin, fight, and fly back. Every briefing, every intelligence report, every promise from Luftwaffe High Command, all of it was wrong. And if the Americans could reach Berlin with fighter escorts, then nowhere in Germany was safe anymore. Fischer managed to limp his crippled Bf-109 to a small Luftwaffe airfield near Magdeburg, about 80 miles southwest of Berlin. The landing was rough, his landing gear barely deployed, and his engine died just as his wheels touched the runway. He climbed out of the cockpit, his flight suit soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperature. Ground crew rushed to inspect his aircraft. 37 bullet holes. Wing spar damaged. Coolant system destroyed. Tail control cables barely intact. His crew chief,
A veteran mechanic who'd been with Fischer since 1941 just shook his head. "You're lucky to be alive, Herr Oberleutnant." Fischer nodded, but he didn't feel lucky. He felt shocked, stunned, like the rules of war had just changed, and nobody had told him. As Fischer walked to the operations building, he saw other pilots landing, or trying to. One FW-190 came in with only one landing gear down and skidded off the runway in a shower of sparks. Another Bf-109 was so shot up it looked like Swiss cheese. In the debriefing room, the mood was grim. Fischer's squadron had lost 8 aircraft. 8 pilots, men he'd trained with, flown with, trusted with his life, were dead or missing. And they'd barely scratched the American bomber formations. Major Wyke, the squadron commander who'd survived the battle, sat at the head of the table. His face was ashen. "They had Mustangs," Wyke said quietly. "Everywhere. Dozens of them. Maybe over 100. Someone asked the question everyone was thinking. How? How could they fly that far? Nobody had an answer. What Klaus Fischer and his fellow Luftwaffe pilots didn't know, what German intelligence had catastrophically failed to understand, was that the Americans had solved the impossible equation. Range. The P-51 Mustang, equipped with 2 108-gallon drop tanks under its wings, could fly over 850 miles on a single tank of fuel. That meant a combat radius, flying to the target, fighting, and flying back, of over 700 miles. Enough to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. But it wasn't just range that made the Mustang so deadly. It was everything else. The P-51B that Fischer encountered that day over Berlin was powered by a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin V1653 engine, producing 1,400 horsepower. At 25,000 feet, where Fischer's squadron had engaged the bombers, the Mustang could hit 440 miles per hour. Fischer's Bf-109 G6? Only 385 miles per hour at that altitude. The Americans were simply faster. And then there was firepower. The P-51B carried 6 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 3 in each wing. That's 1,880 rounds of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. When all 6 guns fired simultaneously, they could rip a Bf-109 apart in seconds. Fischer's Messerschmitt had one 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. Powerful, yes, but slower rate of fire, and if you missed your shot, you might not get another chance against a faster opponent. But perhaps most importantly, the American pilots flying those Mustangs had something the Luftwaffe no longer possessed in 1944. Training. By March 1944, American fighter pilots were completing over 300 hours of flight training before their first combat mission. They practiced gunnery, aerobatics, formation flying, and combat tactics until it was second nature. German pilots? Due to fuel shortages and time constraints, new Luftwaffe pilots were being rushed to frontline squadrons with as little as 50 hours of flight time. The pilot who'd shot down Fischer's wingman, Otto Becker, he probably had more flying experience than the German pilot he had just killed. It was a brutal math problem, and Germany was on the losing side of the equation. 3 days after Klaus Fischer's disastrous encounter over Berlin, Reich Marshal Göring, commander of the entire Luftwaffe, held an emergency meeting with his fighter commanders. Göring was furious. How had American fighters penetrated all the way to Berlin? Where were his fighters? Why hadn't they stopped the bombers? Major Adolf Gulland, one of Germany's most decorated aces and general of fighters, tried to explain. Air Reichsmarschall, the Americans have long-range fighters now. P-51 Mustangs. They can escort the bombers anywhere in the Reich. Göring didn't want to believe it. For years, he'd boasted that enemy bombers would never attack Berlin. He'd called the Luftwaffe invincible. He'd promised Hitler that Germany's skies were impenetrable. But now, the evidence was undeniable. According to historical records, Goering later admitted to being stunned when he learned that American fighters had appeared over Berlin. In post-war interrogations, he would make his famous statement, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." Because Goering understood what Klaus Fischer and every other German pilot had learned that day in March 1944. If the Americans could reach Berlin with fighter escorts, then Germany had already lost the air war. And without air superiority, the Third Reich was doomed. That night, in his quarters at the Magdeburg airfield, Klaus Fischer opened his combat diary. Every pilot kept one, a personal record of missions, victories, losses, and thoughts. He'd written in this diary after every mission since 1941, victories over Spitfires during the Battle of Britain, close calls over the Eastern Front, celebrations when he'd achieved his 10th kill, then his 20th, then his 40th kill. But tonight, his hand shook as he wrote. Reading from Fischer's memoir. March 6, 1944. Mission to intercept American bombers over Berlin. We were told the Americans had no long-range fighters. We were told Berlin was beyond their reach. We were told we would slaughter the bombers like sheep. We were wrong. The P-51 Mustang appeared over Berlin today. Not just one, dozens, maybe over 100. They were faster than our 109s. They could outdive us, outclimb us, outturn us, outshoot us. We lost 8 aircraft, 8 men. Otto Becker is dead. He was 22 years old. I barely made it back alive. 37 bullet holes in my aircraft. If I had been 1 second slower on my brake, I would be dead too. I've flown against the British, against the Russians, against American Thunderbolts. But this was different. The Americans have a fighter that can go anywhere, do anything, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Fischer paused. He looked at the photos pinned to his wall, his squadron mates, many of them now dead. He thought about his wingman, Otto Becker, who died trying to save him. Then he wrote something that would prove prophetic. Reading as Fischer's memoir. We cannot win this war. Not anymore. The Americans have too many planes, too many pilots, too much fuel, too much of everything. Every day, more of us die, and they just send more Mustangs. How much longer can this continue? How many more pilots will die before our leaders admit the truth? We are beaten. The Mustang has seen to that. The memoir paused. Klaus Fischer flew 7 more missions in March and April 1944. Each time he encountered American Mustangs. Each time, more of his squadron mates died. By May 1944, his original squadron of 24 pilots had been reduced to just 6. The rest were dead, captured, or too badly wounded to fly. Fischer survived the war, but barely. In October 1944, his Bf-109 was shot down by, ironically, a P-51 Mustang near Dresden. He bailed out and broke his leg in the landing. By the time he recovered, the war was essentially over. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, Fischer was interviewed by American intelligence officers. They wanted to know about German tactics, German aircraft, German morale. But Fischer wanted to talk about the P-51. According to the interrogation report, Fischer told the American officers, "The Mustang changed everything."
Before March 1944, we thought we could win. We thought German fighters were superior. We thought the Luftwaffe was invincible. Then
the Mustangs came, and we realized we'd been lied to. By our commanders, by our intelligence, by our leaders. The Mustang wasn't just a better fighter. It represented something we couldn't compete with. American industrial power, American training, American innovation. We were still flying tactics from 1940. You were inventing the future. And that's why we lost. The March 6, 1944 mission, the mission where Klaus Fischer first encountered the P-51 Mustang over Berlin, became a turning point in World War II. The numbers tell the story. On that single day, American fighters shot down 82 German aircraft. The Luftwaffe lost veteran pilots it could never replace. Men who'd flown since 1939 or 1940. The backbone of German air defense, were gone. Meanwhile, the Americans lost 11 P-51s. Tragic, yes, but replaceable. By June 6, 1944, D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy, the Luftwaffe was a shell of its former self. When thousands of Allied aircraft swarmed over the Normandy beaches, only 2 German fighters appeared. 2. The Luftwaffe, which had once numbered thousands of fighters and dominated European skies, had been reduced to irrelevance, and the P-51 Mustang was largely responsible. American pilots flying Mustangs claimed over 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat during World War II. That's more than any other Allied fighter by a significant margin. But the Mustang's impact went beyond kill counts. It broke the back of the Luftwaffe. It made strategic bombing possible. It allowed the D-Day invasion to succeed. It gave Allied ground forces total air superiority. Most importantly, it saved lives. British and American bomber crews who would have been shot down by German fighters made it home because Mustang pilots protected them. Klaus Fischer understood this better than anyone. In a letter he wrote in 1946, after the war, he reflected on that day in March 1944 when he first encountered the Mustang over Berlin. I was stunned. Not because the Mustang was a miracle weapon. It wasn't. It was a good aircraft flown by well-trained pilots. That's all. But I was stunned because it proved what we'd refused to believe. That America's industrial might, their training programs, their resources, were simply too much for us. We thought we were fighting pilots and planes. But we were really fighting America's factories, America's training schools, America's oil fields. And you can't win that war with courage alone. The P-51 Mustang represents one of the greatest achievements in aviation history. It wasn't just a fighter plane. It was a symbol of American ingenuity, combining a British engine with an American airframe to create something neither nation could have built alone. A symbol of American industrial power, producing over 15,000 Mustangs between 1942 and 1945. A symbol of American training excellence. Pilots who were better prepared, better equipped, and better led than their enemies. And most importantly, a symbol of American heroism. Pilots like Lieutenant Robert Johnson, who flew his P-47 Thunderbolt home despite 200 bullet holes. Pilots like Major James Howard, who single-handedly fought off German fighters for 30 minutes to protect a bomber formation, earning the Medal of Honor, the only fighter pilot in the European theater to do so. Pilots like the Tuskegee Airmen of the 33rd Fighter Group, who flew Mustangs and never lost a bomber they were escorting to enemy fighters, a record unmatched by any other escort group. These American pilots, flying American aircraft, defeated one of the most experienced air forces in history. And they did it with skill, courage, and determination. Klaus Fischer survived the war and lived until 1987. In his later years, he became friends with several American P-51 pilots he'd fought against. At a reunion in 1978, an American veteran asked Fischer what he remembered most about encountering the Mustang for the first time. Fischer thought for a moment, then smiled sadly. "I remember thinking, how is this possible? And then I remember thinking, we're going to lose this war." The American pilot nodded. "We worked hard to make sure you did." Fischer laughed, a genuine laugh. "Yes, yes you did. And you succeeded." On March 6, 1944, a German fighter pilot named Klaus Fischer encountered something he never expected. Not just an American fighter over Berlin, but the future. A future where American technological superiority, industrial capacity, and pilot excellence would dominate the skies. A future where the Luftwaffe, once feared across Europe, would be systematically destroyed. A future where Nazi Germany would lose the war. And it all began with a single moment. A German pilot, flying over his capital city, suddenly face to face with a silver American fighter that shouldn't have been there. The P-51 Mustang. The fighter that changed everything.